Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to the latest Radio Centre Ireland webinar. And many thanks for taking the time this morning. And a good evening and real warm welcome to both Karen Nelson-Field and Peter Penta, who are joining us from Australia. It's evening time over there, so I really appreciate Karen and Peter taking the time because I know we are eating into your evening. So many thanks. The subject matter today is the attention revolution and the role for audio. And ultimately what this webinar is about is really getting to deep root understanding of does advertising or how does advertising and media work, what works and what doesn't work, and to measure the real impact of commercial messages on people. And that's ultimately what we want to try and do today, and really understand the real impact of advertising on people and how they consume those advertising messages. We will have a panel discussion towards the end, so please use the Q&A or the chat and ask some questions. Now, we have quite a lot of people on the webinar, so we probably will not get to answer all questions. We will answer some during the panel discussion at the end, and then we can follow up with other questions afterwards. Shortly, Peter will be talking about his vision about measurement in terms of media quality and where that is going, and the real importance of long-term memory encoding and how that directly impacts sales and the role that radio and audio plays in that space. But before Peter talks, firstly, you're going to hear from Karen. She's going to talk about the attention revolution, something that advertisers and agencies are really leaning into to really understand, are people really paying attention to the commercial messages? And you know, how attention metrics are really making media planning more effective. That's ultimately what we're looking at this morning. Karen and her team have been pioneering in this area for the past 5 years, focusing mainly on visual media and really, you know, really talking about the big gap between viewability and actual viewed with attention, and really talking about that. The metrics that are there in terms of viewability have failed advertisers in the past. But more recently, Karen and her team have broken out and looked at the world of audio. There's currently some research happening in Australia in the area of audio and attention, and that is expanding into other markets and hopefully into Ireland in early 2023. Karen is the CEO and founder of Amplified Intelligence and the author of The Attention Economy and How Media Works. So please, I'd like to welcome Karen to the webinar. Many thanks, Karen.
Good morning, everyone. It's super exciting to be here. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. Slideshow. Okay, so unless I hear from anyone, I'm assuming you can see that. Great intro. Thank you very much. I have very limited time, so I'm going to quickly talk through a bit about framing the attention economy, what it is, what it's not. I'm also going to talk a little bit about, expand on the problem that we're facing or the problem that we're trying to solve for, and from an attention perspective, also kind of move into collection methodologies, and then finally finish up with what we are doing in audio. So we've got lots to get through. So let me start with this. Marketers tend to steal, what is the attention economy? Marketers tend to steal concepts from other sectors. That's kind of a normal thing. And it's no different for this concept of attention economics. So the study of attention economics is essentially a study that kind of looks at, the impact, if you like, of distraction or inattention on social systems or health or, road services or all sorts of things. So a classic example is the study of attention economics began when radar noise was causing problems for World War II, landings in certain, areas of the world around planes. Now, no one's going to die, but the attention economics in terms of inattention to advertising is actually causing us a lot of money. But again, it comes from other sectors, such as, if you don't pay attention while you're driving, what happens? If you don't pay attention while you're studying, what happens? So that is attention economics. Now, this is how I define it. It comes from lots of literature. I didn't make this up. And basically the concept of, or the definition of attention, is when a human stops for a fleeting moment and focuses on a single stimuli while trying to reduce what other clutter is around them for the purpose of learning or for the purpose of mental evaluation. Now, in advertising, that's easier to say, hard to achieve, because the reality is we live in what I call this constant state of zombie. And most marketers have this vision of us sort of staring at an ad, paying concentrated and sustained awareness or sustained attention to it. And it's not the case. This is real data. This is how people pay visual attention to ads. So you have this constant state of switching where for one split second you're watching the ad, and then for more seconds you're reading something on the screen, and the next minute you're looking over at the cat, and then you're back at the screen, and then you kind of peer down. So there's this constant state of switching, which is what natural human behavior does. And therein lies the problem here, because if you think about this whole active attention line up at the top, what you can see there are gaps, right? So we're not paying concentrated attention across all of the time in view. There's gaps at which you kind of dip in and out while the clock is ticking, right? And this is the first problem. So we talked just a second ago about the critical failure of the MRC standard. It's actually not the standard. I'll get to that in a minute. But the reality is that viewable inventory, around 75% of it gets you no attention, right? So if you think about what that actually means, that's a real concern for those who use the viewability currency as the thing they buy against in media trading. But this is why it's actually happening. It's not the MRC standard. It's all related to time in view. It's the absolute root cause of modern measurement failure, because for all of that switching that happens, the clock is ticking and we're collecting time in view, and we're paying for that, whether it's ad length or whether it's not, whether it's purely time in view or completion rates. The reality is that there's very small relationship, if not negligible, between actual attention paid and time in view. Here I just pulled a random set of data, and this shows that 31% of time in view can be accounted for by active attention or people paying attention to the ads. And that's pretty bad. So if you put it the other way, 2/3 of what you, which is essentially what I said before on the slide before, 2/3 of what you're buying, no one's looking. This is the second problem. So when you have this sort of issue, what it means is that most ads, and I know Peter's going to talk a little bit about this down the track, but most ads don't actually reach what I call the attention memory threshold. So we see in our own data, because we do mental availability tracking, so long-term mental availability tracking as well as short-term brand uplift. And what we see is that around 2.5 seconds point in time of attention is when people start to sort of remember a little bit more. And if you pull a random sample offline, online, 85% of that generates less than 2.5 seconds. So this makes it really, really difficult for brands to be remembered, quite frankly, in the online capacity. This is also, so this whole era, if you like, of a time in view is why attention proxies don't work. So anyone that tells you they're doing, you know, attention units or attention averages or using time in view or, you know, advanced viewability or whatever you want to kind of call it, they just don't work. I call it an ill-fitting Band-Aid because it's a Band-Aid fix because they want to try and improve the problem that we're solving. But the reality is they're solving it with more of the same. So, you know, I often get, that's easy. We'll just solve the problem with better creative because that will fix it. Like if we build a better ad, more people will view it. It doesn't work that way. So what we know is that the functionality of the platform is the core driver of inattention. So if you think about a typical mobile screen, the more things that are being thrown at you, even though theoretically the advertisers are thinking, you know, we're interrupting you so that you'll see it, you switch off more. So what we know is that each platform has a range and format has a range of attention that you gain because of the nature of its scrollability or its audio, because we collect audio as well, or just other features of the user experience. So when there's a limit to how much attention that platform or format affords you, it makes it very difficult for creative to punch outside of that. And we know that because we see we've been collecting for 5 years across 12 plus countries now. And we know over and over and over again, we see this pattern. So brand A, this is real data. Brand A gets 7 seconds on platform A, 5.5 on platform B, 3.3, 2.9. Brand E gets 6.4, 4.1, 3.2, 2.7. Brand J gets 6.1, 3.8. So you can see there's a pattern of decline, right? And that's the same ad on 4 different platforms that have the capacity to give you different amounts of seconds between best and worst. Now, if creative was the driver of attention, what you would see is that brand A would get 7 seconds consistently across all those platforms. Brand H would get 5.9 seconds consistently. Brand M. So the only differences you can see is between brand A and brand M. So that's good and bad creative. But in terms of how it's impacted across platforms, you can't get away from it. So we know that media placement dominates creative, and that's an unfortunate thing. I was on a podcast or a presentation last night with Orlando Wood, and he talks about the nature of creative and how difficult it is to punch through. On top of that, the creative is tempered by the functionality of the platform. So it's pretty hard for creative to work. So this is the point it all went wrong. So we made some decisions. When the internet was born and when online measurement was a thing, that we have to scale. We stopped measuring humans. We stopped measuring outward, I call it, outward facing, and we started to measure metadata, which is inward facing. So have a think about that. We used to measure humans, not necessarily in the best way, whether it's lab small or whether it's diary or whatever it is. We used to measure human viewing. Now, because of the scale and the capacity to do so, we measure metadata, and in particular time in view, and make assumptions around human viewing. And that's the disconnect we see in the data we have, that metadata compared to human attention data tells a very, very different story. So I often say, unfortunately, it's a bit of a dice roll in terms of what you're actually getting below the surface, because it affects reach-based planning. It affects, share of voice, share of market planning. It affects anything that relies on equitable impressions. So we were reminded quite abruptly recently that reach-based planning is gold standard, and we should all focus on that and not attention. Well, the reality is it might be the basic premise to brand growth, but the basics are broken, because what's happening underneath, it means you don't know whether this particular impression gets more or less attention volume than this particular impression. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve for. So just quickly, let me talk about how we collect data, because it's very important to understand, I guess, particularly before Pete gets on. So my PhD is audience measurement. So I made a clear and purposeful decision to try and fix a measurement problem at scale. So the way that we collect data was designed for scaled audience measurement, for this data to be used, if you like, as a signal to augment existing data, to fill, correct the discrepancy that sits behind the error at the moment. So in doing so, the way that you scale is you have to think about how can you get into 25 countries at once. And we do this with a few means. So on mobile, we collect attention via, I'm going to talk about audio in a minute, but with attention, we collect via gaze detection on mobile. So what that means is we collect metadata, but we also put the camera on across different views on Facebook and Twitter and, Snap and you name it, we collect from. And we collect whether someone's looking at the ad, which is called active attention. Passive attention is when they're not looking at the ad, but they're looking at the screen. And then non-attention is when they're not looking. So that's gaze-based. So that's understanding where the eyes are. And the reason why you can do that is because the camera and your eyes are super close. But when you step back a bit, because we also do television collection, what happens is we use the same metrics. So active attention is when you're looking at the screen. Passive attention in TV is when you're dual screening or you're on the couch and you're talking to your friend, or the technology can see you, but you're not looking at the screen, and non-attention is when you walked out of the room. But this is different because this is facial recognition because we're further away. So you can't see eyeballs when you're 8 meters away, right? So the television collection is similar in that it's used on camera, but it's a different model where it understands mathematically where your face is looking and makes that prediction between active and passive. And cinema is the same. So we've since built models in cinema, but again, better cameras and built for many, many meters. And so facial recognition is used in this forum as well. And the one we've just done, and I know it's going to print soon in the press, is outdoor. So we now have gaze tracking, facial recognition, and we're starting to use pose tracking. So it actually is 3 different models, but using the same footage, but to make predictions around human viewing and where they look. And it's all related to distance, opportunity, and in real world rather than in lab. So just for your information, because obviously Pete's a neuroscientist, so I just wanted to add this. We know that attention time is important, but it's also how people are viewing that makes important as well. So we see underneath the data that we see all these different attention viewing clusters, if you like, or profiles. And it takes into account not only how much time someone's looking, but how distracted they are, and what does that profile look like? Because we know that someone that's switching a lot is less likely to have a memory-based outcome than someone that only looks for 3 seconds but looks intently. So below the surface, these viewing clusters are really, really important, and they will be the future part of individual level buying decisions, which we're a bit excited about. So we're pretty serious about the way we collect data and also how the models work. So we believe that if there was a different model for each different format, then it wouldn't make sense to be able to build out channel planning solutions and verification solutions and buying solutions. So only when models are equal can omni-channel be truly universal. So we're super fussy about that. We have multiple PhDs in the space. What about audio? So the good news is we've known all along that audio plays a role. The way that we collect data accounts for this because we already collect volume, sound on, sound off, but also volume. And so we've known all along that audio plays a role. It's hard to disentangle it when you are doing visual only, but at the same time, it accounts for it in the outcomes. So we see, for example, when sound is on and the attention is the highest versus when the proportion of sound on is low, then the actual outcomes are lowest as well. So we know there's a relationship, which is why we wanted to move towards building something in the audio space. And, at the end of the day, visual attention is one part of the puzzle. And so about 3 years ago, we started working around how could we possibly translate this that we do, which is visual attention, to an audio framework. And because we'd collected so much data, what we could start to see is that the outcomes that we collected against visual data, we could start to model, or what I would call reverse engineer the coefficients. So we know how much attention is paid for X, Y, Z outcome in both short and long term. So what if we could understand this relationship and predict it in audio? And that's what we've been doing. So we've done it now across podcast, digital streaming, and broadcast radio. And it's in Australian market again now. So we're starting to see some really good results about, whatever the outcomes are that we test, and being able to reverse engineer that and make some assumptions around how much attention. Is it perfect? No. Would it be better if there was a different method that could, be really quite particular about, if they actually physically heard it? In a scalable way, we feel this is probably the best way to do it. And we're having large success, and we're seeing consistency across countries, which is really important. So for me, I'm excited to move into the audio space. We get asked about this constantly from our customers. So we have API data across multiple countries with big customers. And And they always say, what about audio? What about audio? So we're excited to be able to sort of integrate it into the data that we've already collected. And I think that will put audio on the map in terms of future planning and buying, or more so on the map. So thank you for your time.
Many thanks, Karen. That is really some fascinating data there. I suppose the first key question is what's the digital ecosystem built for brands to communicate to people? Because it sounds like, based on the data you showed, there's real issues in that regard.
So that's an amazing question. I think the short answer is the digital ecosystem was built to reach lots of people, but not really. It's built by coders, right? So not really by marketers. So when you think about the scalability, 100% to reach people, but not really connecting the dots between communicating with people and actually getting people to look at something or listen to something that you put in front of them. So I think there's a big disconnect between, which I've just explained, between the metrics that were originally brought in to measure success, because they make major assumptions about human attention or human interest and are ways off. Good question.
And a stat you shared previously was, 85% of impressions have 2 seconds or less, and yet each platform has certain structures which make it difficult for the creative to differentiate. So what do brands do in that area then? What's the solution?
So what you need to understand is that all platforms and all formats have their place, right? And their role to play, because there's a lot more to it around geography and target audiences and message, blah, blah, blah. So the short answer is, if you understand the nuances by platform and format, you can build content for purpose. So the big one is reverse the reveal. So on, platforms where you get 2 seconds of time, don't be building it into second 6, because you know what's going to happen. So there's some pretty easy wins. So I say to people, don't be frightened to use socials or online, because there are some value plays in there, but just really understand which formats within those platforms are the ones that will drive the most. And it depends on the outcomes, because sometimes it's just short-term outcomes you want. You're refreshing memory structures, you're not building them, right? So I think that's my answer.
And in terms of the audio research that's ongoing in Australia at the moment, how people consume audio is quite different in terms of the relationship between the medium and the consumer. How do you build that? How do you feel audio plays within that ecosystem? Because it's quite different in terms of how people consume that medium.
Yeah, so what we have seen over time is that there are consistent. So I look at audio as the overall platform, and then the context within it as the format. So for example, when you're running, you have it in your ears, you have a different relationship, you're listening. When you are in the car, sometimes you're distracted because you're actually driving a car and speaking to children, so it depends on the environment. So I look at the environment unto the same way as I would look at like feed on Facebook. One is a format and one is a platform. So we're trying to sort of understand how all of those different formats within audio fit in, and then how can, audio vendors then best create CPMs or deals around those wins, if you like.
And do you know when the results of the study in Australia are going to be published? Is that soon?
I couldn't tell you exactly. I think it's November. I have to check with Josh, but I know that the data has actually completed. So I'm assuming it's not far.
Great, we're looking forward.
But I shouldn't spoil that surprise, because I'm not sure exactly. But it's this end of the year.
Brilliant, great. Listen, really appreciate it, Karen. If you hold on, we'll have a short panel discussion after Peter does his presentation. So many thanks, Karen. And now to go on to a very much related subject, when Peter is going to talk now, and ultimately one area that Peter is really key to his presentation is that 90% of decisions are made within the subconscious and not the conscious, but yet often how marketing strategies are structured, they relate to the conscious rather than subconscious. And long-term memory encoding is absolutely critical to building long-term memory structures. So now we're going to hand over to Peter. Peter is a recipient of the Advertising Research Foundation's Great Mind Award. He's worked in media advertising and research for the past 28 years, and he's currently CEO of Neuro Insight APAC. So, Peter, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Kieran. I really appreciate your very warm welcome. Can you give me the thumbs up to say that screen share? Fantastic. Yes, mate. Look, thank you for having both Karen and I on the line. It seems eerie that we're sort of beaming in from the land of Down Under together, but we're delighted to share our stories with you. And yeah, so with you, your clients and agencies around Ireland today, there's obviously plenty more where this little story comes from. So if there are any questions, obviously happy to field them at the end of the session, or indeed if any of your clients and agencies want to filter any further inquiries back through you, we'd be happy to help as well. So yeah, look, I think it's fair to say that there's a real movement that's been started, isn't there? And it's just so encouraging to see this and to hear about the growing appetite in what we're now talking about, media quality and the quality of media. And how does that really work, and how do you really measure that? So what we want to do is really just share our vision for what's happened in the past 15 years, our vision for the future of where that measurement will hopefully continue to grow, and then share some examples of what we've seen in the audio space, in the radio space, in the past few years, and kind of reflect on the power of what might be a passively consumed medium, but can definitely be a very, very powerful medium as well when we look at that key metric of long-term memory encoding that you mentioned in the intro, Kieran. So let's start with I guess really why we're talking about neuro. We're often asked, so why neuro? And it really is all about that point you made about the subconscious. It's a hugely important point, and actually there's certainly a growing appetite about the subconscious and the science of how media content and creative is actually consumed. So if you were to use this somewhat of a cliche, and it's the iceberg, we talk about the fact that only about 10% of sort of processing or responses is really like above the surface, which is what we call explicit or sort of conscious access to. So if you're asked a question about can you recall prompted or unprompted a brand in telco space, you might say Vodafone or something, that comes from your explicit, what you have access to. But there's the other 90% which we actually are out of our sort of conscious access, and that's what we would call the subconscious or the implicit or system one, the intuitive, the fast response. And it's really important that we actually measure all of that through neuro, which is what we do, because that's how we respond to media content. It's how we respond to creative content, and indeed the world around us, the experiences around us are constantly being responded to, mainly automatically and mainly subconsciously. So that's why we measure the subconscious. But here's the point: when it comes to the drivers of human behavior and human decision making, and as Karen was saying, it's really important to actually get back to the human metric behind our responses. They all have the potential to drive behavior and to influence decision making. So whether you can recall it through prompted or unprompted surveys is kind of almost irrelevant. That can be important, but all of our responses, whether they're above or below the waterline, drive behavior, and that's really the foundation. And so some of the most important sort of premises behind that subconscious measurement is that when we actually set out to actually measure TV, radio, out of home, and anything in the digital space, it's the ad or the content that we're delivering is always served in context. Responses always occur in the moment on a second-by-second basis. So there's quite a lot going on. And again, what we're really all about, we actually measure quite a few different measures. Like the brain is quite specialized, and there are certain areas that have certain jobs, and we actually measure all of the areas, and I can kind of mention them as we go through this presentation. But the key metric, as you said, Kieran, at the start, is long-term memory encoding. And those four words are very, very important. Long-term, not short-term or working memory, the here and now. So long-term. Memory, of course, is the memory structures we often talk about, how brands grow, It was referred to by Karen as well, and encoding. So this is a measure of experiences as they are going into long-term memory. So that's what you're looking at here, as opposed to, again, something like recall, which is your ability to dredge something out of long-term memory, which is only a fraction of what's in there. Of course, everything that goes in drives behavior and drives a response. And of course, the other important thing is that long-term memory encoding is the key link to real-world sales. So there's a very, very strong correlation there as well. There are other measures that we report on as well. And the other key one that actually goes into advertising impact you hear a lot about is emotion. So emotional intensity. And that's generally another important link, if you like, to real-world sales. So what we have done as part of our vision for the future is to develop a metric, which is a universal standardized metric called the neuro impact factor, a trademarked term around the world now, which can be applied to pretty much any medium, TV, radio, out of home, and we actually look at all of these measures. Of course, the jewel in the crown of the neuro impact factor is long-term memory encoding. And when you think about what drives a response or long-term memory encoding, there are so many factors that go into it, and some of the most obvious when you think of radio, TV, and the above-the-line advertising that we often talk about is sight, sound, creative, context, clutter, emotion, storytelling, and even previous experiences. All are factors, very, very important factors that influence media and creative impact. And so we can actually look at creative impact with the neuro impact factor, or indeed in the context of today's discussion about audio, the role of a medium like radio, which relies heavily on audio. So that's an important construct. It's important, again, to sort of qualify what we were talking about and what we mentioned earlier. This is just a very quick take if anyone's into their stats, but we found that there's a very, very strong correlation with the neuro impact factor and real world sales. I won't go into too much detail here, but every one of those 17 dots there is a campaign that we worked with a client on, where they could use econometric modeling to develop a score for the effectiveness of real world sales or the sales change of a particular campaign, about 3 or 4 years worth of data here. And if you put them through neuro and correlate our metrics, we found a very, very strong correlation. So it's a very important underpinning if we're going to use these metrics to talk about creative impact or media impact. We want to be pretty sure that they're talking about something substantial or confirmed and actually validated within market performance. So the second half of my presentation is really just to share beyond the vision of the neuro impact factor and the important ingredients that go into impact, is to share some of the examples that we've seen about audio and some of the really I guess iconic examples that we've worked with over the years. And this is one that we really love to talk about, and that is, I think we're all familiar with the Intel chime. The first few seconds of an ad will have that ding 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 chime, and if you just simply look at the ad, a TV ad with the chime, the data on the left about 0.75 versus the data on the right, simply looking at the logo but without the chime, and you have a significantly lower level of long-term memory encoding. So we believe and we see that audio adds so much meaning to a brand and its communication, and it can be a fleeting second or two, like the Intel chime, where you get a significantly higher impact or bang for your buck, if you like. One of the other famous studies that we've done, and Kieran, we were talking about this because this was actually produced by the Radio Centre in the UK, one of your close cousins, and this is probably one of my all-time favourites. You could argue that audio, or in your case, radio, is consumed quite passively, but we would say it could be passive but incredibly powerful. So certainly passive, but very, very powerful. This is a great context study where we looked at ads that were in context versus out of context. So the in context advertising was simply an ad that was congruent to the task that the respondents were doing. So respondents were asked to write a grocery list down for the items that they wanted to buy at a supermarket. Now, if an ad for a supermarket happened to appear on radio in the background, whilst writing that grocery list, that ad was 28% more effective, more long-term memory encoding, just by simply being congruent to the task that you were doing. And there were many other tasks like exercising, working on your computer, opening emails. And so we looked at various in and out of context scenarios where the ad was congruent, in context versus out. So, you know, that's quite significant. Thinking about audio and the role of radio and the role of an activity, or the contextual fit and match between what a consumer is doing, and for something that's just in the background to be encoded almost 30% stronger is a significant win for an advertiser. So a very powerful and probably one of our all-time favorite context study that was done through the Radio Centre in the UK. Back home in Australia, we're working with the Australian Traffic Network, ATN, who do live reads off the back of a traffic update, for example. And here's about probably 15 to 20 seconds worth of neuro data here, showing you the strength. So obviously, the higher that trace is, that second by second worm, if you like, in the middle, the higher that is, the stronger that moment is being stored into memory. Of course, every ad needs to be stored into memories, especially messaging and branding. And what we see here is a time series data that has your pre-response, has your response during the traffic update, and then the response to the live read ad for the remaining 10 seconds. So the important message here is that we find that momentum is incredibly important, you know, in terms of a linear experience. You know, something can set a moment up like a traffic update, especially if you're driving a car. This is relevant to me. And then the momentum that's given to the ad following the traffic update, and especially if it carries the same live read. And we talk about this as being in context, but also blending in to the fabric of the surrounding context is just so important. And that's why live reads work so well on radio, and the momentum you get from one piece of content to the other cannot be underestimated. So yeah, a really unique look at how context, momentum, and live reads work. And to perhaps round out our set of examples today before we take it, any questions for Q&A, a fascinating study here about the combination of radio and, in this case, out-of-home, the out-of-home medium. So essentially, by design, this study was set up with the same radio content and the same out-of-home content, and the advertising was linked. So the advertising on radio was obviously an ad on radio, and then they saw the ad in out-of-home. And we reversed the orders. So you had order A, which was radio, followed by out-of-home, and then B, out-of-home, followed by radio. And you can start to look at how they prime one another. And it really is interesting if you look at the combination of all the first exposures on the left, the data, which is what we call the unprimed. So the first time you hear an ad, it all comes in at 100, which is just what we do with the data. We index it to start at 100. What's interesting is what the priming effects that do once you hear the same message or see the same message again in the supporting medium, whether it be out of home or radio. And it's a great example. All the various colors sort of represent all of the various types of measures that we would report on. Just quickly, engagement on the far left, emotional intensity, long-term memory encoding for detail, long-term memory encoding for global, which is left and right brain, composite memory, the average of both, general attention, and then visual attention on the far right purple. And what we see is that the richer and the more meaningful measures, which is why we always focus on long-term memory encoding, go up. So the dark red and the dark blue, particularly the red, long-term memory encoding for details, skyrocketed by 55% on the second impression versus the first. So, and of course, in the real world, this is exactly how campaigns begin to unravel. And that is that, marketers aren't necessarily buying one media exclusively. They're looking to understand not only the value of a medium, but how priming effects work and how important it is to have certain elements that are consistent between audio and visual mediums, like radio, and out of home. So you can see how there's a significant impact, an increase in all the richer measures. What is also interesting is that visual attention tends to decrease as a campaign sort of unravels. And we're often asked, why is that? And that is, we think because the brain makes mental shortcuts that requires less attention as a campaign tends to grow, and yet it still grows in terms of long-term memory, which is the key to advertising success. So that's our vision for the future. It's about impact and really unlocking the value of media. And it's well and truly time, as Karen said, to take this stuff really seriously, because marketers are always asked to do more with the same or less resources, and this is the way that we believe data can help unlock the value and give you a competitive advantage. So I hope you've enjoyed the vision and also the examples that we've had on show today. Finally, if anyone is keen to do any more reading, we've been
many thanks, Peter.
Cool. There's a bit of reading follow up there on WARC if anyone was interested to check out more of what we've been talking about. So I will stop sharing on that note, and happy to field any comments, thoughts, questions, or anything that's come in from your constituents.
Many thanks, Peter. The first question would be, if we're talking about 90% of decisions are in the subconscious, and you explained, the long-term encoding, are marketers or brands doing that in great purpose, or is there much work to be done? Or can you give me examples of brands or advertisers who are doing it well, and brands who maybe are not doing it as well?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the general kind of comment is we would say, hey, why isn't everyone tuning into the subconscious and using metrics? So, we would always want a greater appetite. But look, in reality, this is an evolution and it is a movement. And I think if you were to go back 15 years, and I can certainly recall a time when, science and media really were never used together, whereas now they're always used together. And I think there's so much, and the fact that we're presenting tonight and sharing our stories with you is certainly testament to the fact that there's a huge growing appetite for understanding media quality. And, in our world, that is, fully measuring the conscious and the subconscious. So look, there is a growing appetite. It's great. Obviously, long may it live and long may it grow. And hopefully tonight or this morning's session in your time is another installment in that journey in terms of the quality, how impact really works. But look, I think we're in a good spot at the moment in terms of that. There's a very, very encouraging movement in place around media quality, and I can't see it going backwards now. I think it's the genie's out of the bottle, Kieran.
Okay. And we had a chat earlier, you were talking about the quote, you can't turn your ears off when it comes to audio because it's consumed differently to other media. Has that an impact in terms of all the work you're doing in terms of that long-term memory encoding, the specific ability that radio has maybe versus other media?
Yeah, it's an interesting line. It stopped me. That was one of our clients who's of course a radio client, and I thought, wow, I'll keep using that. You can't turn your ears off. You can close your eyes, or you can turn your head away. I just thought it was so compelling, and look, it's true. I think that to me that just ties into the fact that radio could be maybe dismissed as being a passive medium, but in no way is it not powerful. And so it could be in the background. No, you can't turn your ears off, but things do get in probably without you realizing it. And I think that's the power in that message. And I think that context example I showed you was just spot on in terms of something that kind of was congruent to the task you were doing, and lo and behold, 28% more effective, really without you realizing that message was walking in the doorway to memory as a function of the context, and it's still passive.
Very good, great. Maybe Karen, bring Karen back in again, and if anybody wants to just ask some questions on the Q&A, but I know there's a few questions in there, I'll come to them in a second. But a general question to both of you, in terms of currency going forward and how marketing and advertisers have to measure their investment and the return on investment, short term and long term, how should that change in the short to medium term based on everything we've discussed today? How should clients measure the impact of advertising? What should change compared to what they've done historically? Maybe Karen, you might have a view on that first.
Yeah, so I've got quite a strong opinion on this. From an attention perspective, so a scaled, I guess, camera-based kind of attention perspective, I don't see it being a currency anytime soon. I see the future of media measurement with disparate sets of data that merge together to, I guess, augment reach, essentially, because impressions are impressions. I mean, that's the entire world, and all of the ecosystems around it are set up for that to remain steadfast. But I think there'll be improved sets of data, whether it's ours and others, to sort of build, each agency will build their own view of an augmented future and what it looks like in terms of the perfect reach example. So I don't see any of these new currencies or these new metrics becoming currencies anytime soon, because we've just gone too far. I think that's the medium term, maybe in the longer term, possibly. But from my perspective, and certainly Peter's, I guess, because he's dealing with humans, because not all attention vendors use humans, and that's a problem too, right? I mean, we just talked about that. So if you're dealing with humans, it's pretty difficult to collect data at scale in an ethical, privacy safe way. So I think we're going to just have to use what we have and augment it or supplement it.
Very good. Peter, your take on it?
Yeah, look, it is interesting. I agree with the fact that it's it's an augmentation. So I see it as the process you're talking about, Karen, is a synthesis of various inputs at the top of the funnel, if you like, and they kind of make their way down. And it is interesting that, if you look at the media buying or the planning process in media agencies, this is where it tends to stick the best in terms of determining which mediums deserve more or less of the budget, which is not necessarily a currency, but and I do think, like, a currency, it may even be old world language, because I don't know whether any one currency will be the ultimate kind of fix all. It will probably be a synthesis of various data sets that integrate, or a system can integrate an input to get a clearer and a better picture of what real impact really is, given a certain set of assumptions, or a budget and a reach target and that type of thing. Yeah, and it's I just think it's been precipitated by so much change in media consumption, more platforms, and the fragmentation of what was so easy to get, in 10 or 15 years ago, which was reach. Reach is still important, but there has to be other ways to augment it, as Karen says.
Okay, many thanks. And we're just taking some questions from the audience. Of one question I think specifically for you, Karen, is, can you share what platform ABC were from?
I get asked that all the time, and I choose not to. So I try not to get in. I'm not a judge, right? Yeah. So I don't judge who does what. I just know what the outcomes are. And, like I said, each platform and format has its own place in the world, and there's different objectives, and there's different brand sizes, and there's different, target markets. So thanks, but no, I'm sorry. I don't like to be the political one in the middle.
Yeah, fair enough. A second question, again to you, Karen, I think is there any view on whether we can quantify the value of X seconds of passive attention equals Y seconds of active attention?
100%. We're doing that now. 100%. We're doing that now. And what I've learned, because you have to collect. The problem with a lot of researchers is they collect one study and fail to understand, the mediating effects of everything else that comes in around it. So our job for the last 5 years is to go, how does the entire ecosystem work, and how does all of these different things fit in? So we're moving on now from attention seconds alone, which is what I said, and trying to understand the interplay between, passive and active, and which one's more valuable. But there are nuances around that in the brand size and objectives and all that sort of stuff. So you know, what I'm trying to do is not complicate this whole journey. And so I've tried to build out simple messages that you can hold on to around attention and moving forward with it. Because if I actually explained what the majority of our data scientists or our automation team do, I think you'd freak out.
Okay. Next question to you, Peter. To increase the impact of our marketing through priming and radio, what do you think would be the most effective, or some of the most effective ways to do that?
Yeah, I think there's some universal truths that we see in the data or in various studies when it comes to the combo effect or priming. You know, one of the big ones is when a strong or a well-known brand uses a distinctive asset really well. Now, I know, you know, if you've read the Ehrenberg-Bass philosophy or even the IPA, I think they talk about the fact that consistency around you know, a key brand asset, whether it's audio, visual, or both, is just so important to being able to leverage that ecosystem, the combo effect, very quickly and very readily. Otherwise, it's hard work if you go expecting new creative and new assets to work every time. So yeah, that's the quickest way in, and I think that's just because a distinctive brand asset has already got a memory structure, and you're not trying that hard to go and recreate that. You're just going in to strengthen and sort of give it a jiggle, and bang. So it's the distinctive assets that you play on and the consistency that you can do that with. And I guess ideally across an audio and a visual medium, if you can tick those boxes, then you've got the combo effect working your way very, very readily.
But
except when the distribution of attention drops really fast compared to being flat. So distinctive assets are fantastic. I was trained Ehrenberg-Bass, but if you have a platform that means that by second 3 or second 2 even, only 10% of the audience that you've bought is actually even looking, that distinctive asset, which is placed in second 3, means nothing. So it's the combination of the placement and what I call objective branding, which is, you know, not subjective emotions, but it is branding that is recognized and distinctive. So it's a toughie because, you know, you can build an amazing distinctive brand in your own mind, but then, you know, you try and sort of push it, and we see it in our own data, like really highly distinctive brands that have been around forever, you know, people still misattribute them to a different competitor because the ads all look the same, but the asset's kind of late in the play. So it's tough.
I guess we're talking about the ultimate game of, you know, creative and media, and if you can get if you can go tick tick, then you're really cooking. Yeah. Sorry, Kieran.
No, just and the whole, you know, the whole challenge of communicating something important or meaningful in such a short space of time, though, is surely a huge challenge if you're talking about 2 or 3 seconds. You know, in terms of what you're trying to do, a storytelling or whatever it may be, it's huge limitations on everything you can do, and considering that in the digital environment, most people are consuming advertising messages for such a short space of time.
Yeah, ask Orlando Wood. He talks about that all the time, and the art is being lost because of the nature of the ecosystem. So listen to anything he talks about, and you'll see not only has the amount of time you get to spend with an ad changed, but also the way people are adapting to that by changing their creative to make it less poor. Storytelling has changed, so it's kind of this double negative, really. Ask him. Listen to his stuff.
Hopefully when you do your radio research, because that restriction isn't there and the opportunity to do storytelling is much greater, and may show some very strong.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
The next question comes from Lean, and impact on sales are normally used in these studies. We're just wondering, have either of you looked at impact on behavioral change in terms of these studies, like, for example, a government campaign, you know, a health behavior, smoke cessation, and those kind of things?
Yeah, I'll tackle that first if you like, Karen. Like in a way, that's a really important question. Thank you for whoever threw that into the mix. Like in a way, we would kind of argue that even sales change is a measure of behavior change. You know, you're buying more coffee or biscuits, but I think you're talking about, rather than buying a physical item, you've stopped smoking, or you've changed some other aspect of your behavior. I'm just trying to think of a recent example. Like, you know, we've seen positive ROI in the services, like in the banking and the finance category. So you're not buying a physical item, but you're doing something different, or maybe this is getting closer to attitude change. You know, respect for children, respect for the planet, that type of thing as well. Slightly less tangible and more long term. I'm just trying to think. We have seen changes in the services industry. If that's of any help, it will link back to advertising and you know, and the receptivity of long term memory. I'm not sure how you tackle that, Karen. If you've seen the behavioural aspect.
So I have a slightly different view. We know that advertising is not persuasive. All it does is it nudges current propensities to buy or think, right? So, and we also know that attitudes, actually changing someone's attitude before they do something behavioral, is rare. So what we see is that, you know, attention, in a sense, means that you're more likely to buy at the purchase occasion, but not always. But in terms of getting you to do more stuff and more things that you wouldn't do, we haven't had any sort of incidents of that, other than we know that there's an uplift on non-viewing versus viewing. So I think that's, yeah, so getting people to change. I mean, people buy from a repertoire of brands anyway. So if it's not you, it's your competitor, usually in a functional category. So we haven't really seen behavioral change per se, certainly not in the government space, and certainly, although I know there's projects on the horizon in that space, but the answer is not in what we've done, because we've done a lot about buying from stores and buying from restaurants and things like that, and you know, that's not big social change.
We've just time for one last question. How far can creative affect attention by medium? Can we realistically use the average attention numbers for our clients, or should we always be factoring in the type and quality of their creative? Karen.
Well, I can answer that definitively, and the answer is the former. So I'm telling you now, there's not much you can do. The best you can do with your creative is be at the upper range of that elastic limit. So if you've got a range between, you know, if you can get 0 attention to 5 seconds, good creative will get you at 5. And if you can get 4 more seconds than everyone else, then you're doing well. So you should always work hard to have really good creative that's, you know, distinctive, unexpected, interesting, emotional, but you're still not going to, everyone asks me this, you're still not going to be a deviation outside of that limit. They're pretty much set. There's very, very few rare lightning strike occasions that it happens, but it's rare.
I might build on that, Karen. I was going to say, at the risk of being very, very controversial, I might just say what we've seen is that, look, advertising creative effectiveness is heavily governed by the surrounding environment, you know, the media channel and the environment. There's about from memory, 65 to 70% correlation between, you know, the impact within the medium and the impact that the ads get. So it's kind of what Karen was saying. Yeah. So that means that there are isolated cases where you can pop up, or you can shoot down. So you can actually stray beyond that kind of those limits.
But usually that's category based, right? Usually that's category based. So, you know, it's not boring. Yeah, it's usually stuff
but it can happen, and that's the good news. So yeah.
But it's not systematic.
It's
heavily governed by the media channel, but it can happen.
Yeah.
I think this last debate could go on, but we're not going to be able to, because I did promise we would finish, particularly for you, Karen and Peter, because we are eating into your
dinner.
7 into your dinner. So a really interesting debate. I wanted to chime in. On that myself in terms of some creative ROI results. But listen, that is a great debate to finish the webinar on. I want to thank particularly Karen and you, Peter, for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And joining the webinar from Australia. Enjoy your evening and enjoy looking forward to the summer as the summer breaks in Australia, as we break into winter. It's a very dark, miserable day here in Dublin this morning. And I want to thank everybody for joining the webinar. It is recorded and will be on the website in a couple of days. So many thanks, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful day and wonderful evening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.